If we did not feel seen, if we did not feel unconditional love, even if it was present, but it just wasn't perceived by us, then we have a deep sense of self-doubt. We have a deep sense of not being enough.
Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm your host, Rachel Astarte. Today, my guest is Denise Miceli. She's an inspiring, empathic guide and mentor in creating space for change and growth. She's known for her talent in energy healing, intuitive hot seat coaching, and teaching new ways of accessing authenticity, which we love. That's what we're all about here. After enduring a difficult dark night journey, Denise cleared traumatic memories and emotional patterns that blocked her authentic self using subconscious healing. In her work with others, she's been inspired to share the simple and accessible healing modality. And we are going to talk a little bit about that as we get chatting. But today, we're really going to focus on something that we all encounter at some point in our lives, especially when we step on a path of growth, which is imposter syndrome. This feeling that somehow we are not enough or that we are not good enough to do the thing that we're setting out to do. So before we dive into that, first of all, welcome, Denise.
Thank you.
And
glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about your dark night of the soul. What got you into this field? What was your calling?
Well, it really originated back to being young and just struggling in a family dynamic that was troubled. And so from a very young age, I sought ways to come back to myself because I felt very much in the role of rescuer. And so I was very motivated by yoga and breath work and meditation. I mean, adolescence. And so it was a kind of a strange thing that I got into it so young, but it really saved me. And so I've been a practitioner of those things. And over the years, I believe that's what really helped me to kind of get connected to who I really was and to challenge that role of always putting others first, which is something that we develop right in that stage of 0 to 7, which, I mean, it jumps right into what is subconscious and conscious. Most people think that the conscious mind is in charge 100% of the time. And it's exactly the opposite. It's like 10% of the time. There's so much research now, and I mean by neurologists and people studying the brain on from all different backgrounds are saying, no, 90% of the time, we are operating out of the subconscious. And so when were those things developed in us, that sense of not being enough? It was 0 to 7. And I say that because it can go back to being inside of your mother, what your mother is going through. And so if you look at it that way, then it makes sense that what happened during those years, even if you don't remember it specifically or accurately, right? There was a feeling that is carried through. And so that's how I got into just kind of alternatives to, I did actually go to therapy by the time I was in my teens, and that was helpful. But I always wanted something that I could practice that was simple on my own. So that's kind of how I got into it.
Yeah. And so really it was, and for many of us, many people who are in the healing fields, it's our own woundedness and desire to heal brought us to what we do. And isn't it interesting how when we awaken, the very first thing we want to do is help others do the same?
Exactly. And I think that has a thread into a little bit of imposter syndrome, because there's a certain amount of toxicity around being the rescuer. Being, I remember doing a lot of work with archetypes. I was very interested in archetypal patterns. And I have this practice that I do in my course where I have people just in their primary family, who were they with, their caregivers from 0 to 7, and actually figure out which archetypes were most present in those people, and it helps you understand who you were. If you had a narcissistic parent, you were going to become a people pleaser, which eventually leads to imposter syndrome when it's unchecked, right? So by doing that, I realized that I was a rescuer, and I never thought of myself that way. I just thought of myself as, more of a protector and all that. But then, you read these archetypes and you go, oh, that so resonates with my soul. And even healer was in there as well. Teacher, guide. Those things were a part of me from a very young age. So it's being able to look at that and say, okay, what are the things that I, can demagnetize or, decrease the negative part of that. And then when you find those answers for yourself, yeah, either people go, okay, now I'm free to go and choose whatever path, or, they will say, oh gosh, I want to help other women. And that's really what, I do. As you mentioned, I feel, that I love creating that container for women, and I don't close my sessions to men or others, but I feel like when you create that container, there's so much healing and bonding that happens. So I love that part.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's make it really basic.
Sure.
I think people have an idea of what imposter syndrome is, right? The feeling of not being good enough. But since this is what you really focus on, how would you define? I mean, that's a very basic definition. How would
Sure.
you define imposter syndrome? What does that look like? How does it show up for people?
So I have so many examples, but I think the basis of it is that when it becomes imposter syndrome, the person has been in a role of putting other people first, or worrying about how they should, what they should do in their life, maybe what their parents' expectations are, um, whatever the external, right? Whether it's family, culture, a number of economics that they should be doing, right? And there's that shoulding on ourselves. It's always a part of it. And so they become disconnected from their authentic selves. So, the biggest example is someone who, is expected to go to college, is expected to, become a doctor or whatever, and does that. And they get there and they're like, this is not who I am. And it's just scary because you wake up one day. And for me, there was a reversal expectation of like, what, you want to go to college? And so, it can happen in any direction. It can be expectation to be married, expectation to have children, right? When women get to a certain age, they're like, oh, I have to make this decision. It's, expected of me. If I don't, so it's always putting your life on an external path, and then waking up one day and saying, you're so disconnected from who you are. And so it could be in any area of your life, but for a lot of women, it can be tangled up with, they're trying to be everything, right? There's that rushing woman syndrome. And a lot of my clients are 40s and up because they're trying to be moms. They're trying to be, they're taking care of everything in the household. They have a professional career. And all of a sudden, their health is going downhill, everything. And when they start to, and this is the interesting thing, because I actually found subconscious healing a few years ago when I was working with people on health. I'm a passionate health nut, and helping people to unravel patterns of, eating and things that were not really helping them. And what I realized is that as soon as they started to change or attempt to change, I'm going to cook this way, I'm going to shop this way, I'm going to prep cook and be prepared for life. And people around them would be like, what? You're not going to drink anymore. What? You're going to, and it was like the resentment comes in. Why? Because that person begins to realize they are not really making their own decisions anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They're making decisions from those externals, those roles, those relationships, those jobs. And and so that led them to feeling like, I don't know what happened. I had this great plan. And then, but they didn't realize how the power they had given externally for their own choices. And when they go to try to empower themselves in health or whatever. And so that's when I started to realize this is really tied to that subconscious programming.
Yeah.
So,
and the hence the word imposter. This is not who I am or who I define myself to be, or do I even know who that is?
exactly. So, that was the impetus for it. And when I started doing that, and I still get people who come to me and say, I've tried everything, I'm doing all this great stuff, but I'm just not getting anywhere. There's something blocked there. There's some way you're looking at it. And so part of what this does is it allows you to shift your perspective. We can all consciously set goals, do vision boards, we can do all that fun stuff. But if there's something subconscious that you're really not aware is even there, and that's where self-talk, self-questioning, journaling, those are all integral parts of my practice. And, I do meditation every morning, I journal every morning, and I'm constantly connecting. The whole goal of it is to just connect with how I'm feeling and how aligned I feel. So I feel like imposter syndrome is a complete misalignment of the self. The body, mind, spirit, soul, whatever you want to call it, has become kind of enslaved to externals. Mm-hmm. And it can be very cultural as well, right? There's still countries where women are told they will marry a person, or even men are told this is who you're married, so there's so many ways that we get disconnected.
Yeah. And so that's another and probably more pervasive way that imposter syndrome shows up. The other one being, and I sort of briefly touched on it at the beginning, where we are about to embark on something that is important to us, and yet we feel we're not good enough, or we don't have the skill set, or we aren't again, that's that negative self-talk holding us back, saying you can't do this thing that you set out to do. That's so that we almost feel as though we are pretending to be something that we aren't, as opposed to, well, I mean, which is the same thing you're talking about, but it's about a competency that we feel, even though we may be perfectly able to do something, there is a subconscious understanding that we aren't, which comes from that patterning. But before we go into that a little further, why do we develop imposter syndrome? Hi, it's Rachel here. If you'd like to dive deeper into your own self-development, but you're looking for an alternative to traditional talk therapy, I think you'll love the Foundation of Self Immersion program. For a full year, you'll get dynamic coursework you can complete on your own time, plus weekly coaching calls and monthly one-on-one sessions with me for personal support. Visit foundationofself.com and click on the events page for more information. That's foundationofself.com. Now, back to the episode.
It's, and I'll go back to the subconscious here, because I think that understanding this is really the basis of it. If we think of our subconscious mind as a camera, it's literally recording every single piece of our lives. And so we have this enormous cloud of information, and it goes into a protective mode. Whenever we are trying to change, especially, but under times of stress as well, it is going to come up in that negative self-talk. It's going to say, oh, I like to use a dating example. It's like, you're chatting with someone, you like them, whatever, or even for a friendship, and you go, oh, don't get too excited. maybe they're lying, like all of that stuff. And if we don't do it to ourselves, we do it to the friends, right? Family members that you can get in a pattern with. And so it's our negative thinking that is, and I believe that our subconscious has a negativity bias because let's face it, we all have ups and downs in life. Nobody has a perfect life. Even if you are happy most of the time, there are things that bring self doubt and situations, people change. I mean, everything is under huge transformation. It's pushing us out of our comfort zone and into a place where the subconscious is so ready to jump in and say, I don't think so. And to think of all of the reasons. And so when you go back to the memories, the emotions, even if the memories are not very clear, but they're just negative around dating or relationship, a lot of times it's because we worry about what other people are going to think. We don't even want to talk about that we have a date because we're afraid of like everyone's waiting to hear, that there's this external pressure that becomes more important. But not only that, it's very connected to pulling out the negativity we're holding on to. And so that's where clearing that, and we'll never get rid of those things. They're part of who we are, but we can certainly tone them down. And so part of the work is actually doing the self-talk of talking to those parts of us. If you've ever come across family systems therapy, a lot of that is very, integral to this work because based on 0 to 7, we had certain key people in our lives. And those situations, if we did not feel seen, if we did not feel unconditional love, even if it was present, but it just wasn't perceived by us, then we have a deep sense of self-doubt. We have a deep sense of not being enough. And so by going into these things and seeing that this is what it was like, we can try to bring it down by talking and just getting in touch with those parts and saying, hey, appreciate you being there. I really do. But you don't need to be driving the bus anymore.
Right.
Like, I'll hear you. I'll see what you're saying. I know already what you're going to say about me meeting people. But I am not that child anymore because the subconscious, and this is really key with the brain, your brain doesn't know where that thought's coming from. It doesn't know that it's a subconscious triggered memory. And that's a whole other thing we could talk about sometime because really think about this. We didn't even have the word triggering 10 years ago. Now we have trigger warnings, right? Why is that? Because imposter syndrome is gone wild. People will react to things that seem so trivial, but there was some piece of that affected their self-perception, their self-worth, their feelings of worthiness. And so triggering is now everybody's all worried about triggering everybody else. And that is a true sign. And that is part of why I created my course, because I said, this is a thread through almost every single client that I've seen for 2 years now, is that there is something in life that just immediately pulls up that negativity. And, whether it's a thought, an emotion, or a memory, it's usually one of those three. But it's so pervasive, they can actually feel it in their body. They can, if they haven't dealt with it emotionally, they can actually feel it in, a chronic body situation as well. So.
Yeah, that's true. But so you've said a lot and I want to pull back to a point. Sure. No, it's great. Is the way that we approach those feelings of those imposter feelings, the negative feelings about ourselves. Do you find that there's anything helpful about imposter syndrome? Is there anything psychologically or spiritually even helpful that I guess it doesn't really help to say, why does it exist? We know what causes it roughly.
Sure.
But is there anything beneficial? And I'm going to give an example of that may sound completely outrageous, but where I live in New York State, there is a pervasive weed that grows here called Japanese knotweed. It doesn't, it's not native, but it is everywhere, and especially, and it has no, in fact, when you try to pluck it up, and every year the town will come and take it off the sides of the road, and every year it comes back bigger. This particular weed, if you want it gone, you basically have to dig about 2 feet under the ground and make sure every seed is gone before it will be gone. And so it got me thinking, why is it here? Everybody hates it. I don't think it's terrible. I mean, it's kind of pretty, but it really is invasive. So I did some research and I found out that the making a tincture of the roots of Japanese knotweed is actually medicine for Lyme disease. And we live in a very populated, deer populated area, lots of ticks, lots of Lyme disease around here. So in a way, something that looked like it's a nuisance actually does, the way nature works in its beautiful way, is it has a healing purpose. So you can see the connection I'm making here. Is there any kind of healing purpose or any kind of positive, I hate to use the word, aspect to imposter syndrome?
Well, I do believe that because we know it exists, because we know there's just an infinite number of examples. You know, I did a class once on creative blocks because we have so many people who define themselves as creators and they have all these grand plans and then they suddenly wake up one day and they're like, I don't know where to start, or I don't know, I don't feel motivated. I don't know what this block is. And it usually is something connected, right? So there's a lot of ways to interpret it. But what I see is that in order to know how to become more authentic, we've got to know what those blocks are. So having a sort of more of a terminology for it is helpful because we have to identify the weed so we can figure out how to get rid of it. Or like you said, at least reduce it. And I think every state can probably relate there's something that grows that we don't want. But then when you look at it, the roots are there for a reason. They're there to explain how you got here. They're there to explain. And it's not about, you know, I talk about family of origin and caregivers and all of that. And it's not about a blame game, but it's more about just owning the responsibilities wherever they, you know, were, and understanding why sometimes, you know, being around people that we've had those situations with today, it, you know, if we don't do that inner work, it can still trigger us back into those roles again. You know, welcome to the holidays, right? So
Yeah.
A lot of people go through this kind of a struggle because they're afraid that going back there, they're going to feel the same negative ways, right? So it is helpful in the sense that it is really the beginning place. So when we start a session, we try to get everyone into a kind of a relaxed mode, but then we do a little bit of conscious digging to say, what's the most present emotion? What is the emotion that just you persistently go back to? And I like to use a continuum because right now it's either anxiety or depression, right? And those are both symptoms of imposter syndrome. But whether you are an overthinker, thinking and worrying about the future is the anxiety, or you're more prone to sadness and getting in a down sort of low energy state of depression. It's a continuum. And based on kind of how you grew the patterns in your life, you know, and some people can go back and forth between the two, but most people tend toward one end. And so by identifying that, it's the beginning of that route. Mm-hmm. It's the beginning of finding the medicine. Like you have to know what that resistance is and see it and understand why it came about to whatever degree, because some people don't have specific memory, but they might just have that feeling. And I'll just tell you a quick example. I had, through my work, remembered an age, a memory that was triggered by looking at old photos. And it was a feeling of not being seen. And I was 4 and I had my shoulders up like that and my hands out like this, like, why? You know, and the memory, the emotion came back through seeing that picture. And it was a feeling of, why am I not included? why am I not getting a dress like everyone else? And everyone laughed and thought it was so cute. And I was crushed. So, and it was a long journey from that point of feeling like I was just on the outside of that structure, So it's one little moment like that, and we need to be able to identify it, right? Even if it's something that feels overwhelming. And this is why I think that talk therapy, in some ways, if that's the only tool, talking about it and seeing more and more patterns in that, it can kind of re-trigger people, I feel.
Absolutely.
And there's been a more of a move to have, therapists and everyone, kind of find more tools, because we don't want to just talk about it. We want to actively practice ways that we can, through our self-talk, through checking our thoughts, checking in with our emotions, and the way that we speak about ourselves and our situation, because they all carry huge power. So
yeah, and our bodies as well, right? We carry these things that are part of our, that house our spirit and our mind. To our bodies are always talking with us, and when we don't think our feelings, we feel them. So being able to tap into that as well, to use all of the resources available to us, right? Which is the holistic psychotherapy, which is so important. I agree. Talk therapy can be re-traumatizing if all you're doing is staying up here, right? And so I really appreciate that perspective. So let's talk about rock your blocks a little bit. What does that mean to rock one's block?
Well, I think, it was an inspired moment I had with a coach friend of mine where I said, I really just feel like everyone has, a sort of energy about them. And for me, when I get interested in something, I'm very passionate about it. And so it really just fit. It fit with my personality. And also, I had been through, more than probably one dark night in my life, to where I had to make a tough choice to leave behind things that felt comfortable. And in doing that, in finding that courage to step away and rock my blocks, things that I feared, right? Because a lot of times, when does imposter syndrome really show up is when we're trying to make a change. We're trying to, assess why we're not happy in a relationship, a job, a career. And I've had a few careers and I was good at them, but there was something deep within me that was just, there was an imbalance. In my 20s, I was a chef and I was so passionate about it. In fact, I love cooking to this day, but there was something that told me, first of all, my body, I was becoming unhealthy, more unhealthy. And I felt terrible. And so I've had to walk away from different things in my life because I listened. And so that whole idea of rocking your blocks is, to help people identify what are those things that maybe you love. Maybe you could even say, you put 20 years into something, but if it doesn't work for you anymore, can you change it? Does changing it bring up fear in you? And can you be open to that? If you soften even the blocks to change, or, just bring down the intensity, that you can make space to imagine something different. So it's like you have to clear away the weeds in order to plant something different that might actually help them to grow less, And so that's really where Rock Your Blocks, the concept, came up. And now it's kind of morphed into, I do individual coaching, but I really want to move towards more a small group because the power of the interaction. But I also do, I have a YouTube channel where I create meditations so that people can just begin that self-awareness journey, like short meditations, mostly 15 minutes for beginners, 30 minutes. And then I started writing, and I've been writing on Medium for a while. I have many articles about imposter syndrome, and I give people just some journaling tools. I feel like people who read sometimes are people who like to write. So I love being able to use different modalities to reach people, because not everybody is going to go listen to a meditation video, and not everybody's going to go read articles, but here's little windows in to finding who you are and to connect with yourself. So
beautiful. And you just beautifully segued into my next question, which is, how can people find you, Denise?
So I have a barcode here where you can get on my email list, and it will take you to a webinar that is recorded. If you're interested in imposter syndrome, people pleasing, any kind of stuck emotional patterns, you'll get linked up to see that. It's about 20 minutes. But then you'll be on my email list, so you'll be informed of anything new that I publish or put out there, and you can stay connected with me. And there's always an option to have a free call to see if you would like to work with me. So.
Beautiful. And so for those watching the video, the barcode is on the screen. For those listening, what's your website, just so that people will be able to find you that way?
Sure. It's just like it sounds. It's rockyourblocks.com, and with all, no spaces in there. And and once you go there, you'll see links to, I have on my contact page, I have a campsite, so it'll have links to all the other options. So people can come in, and I like that they can kind of go where they're comfortable, because you got to start where you are, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's a beautiful thing. So I will make sure that the links are all in the show notes so that people can find them, whether you're getting this on YouTube or you're getting it through wherever you have your podcasts, find your podcasts. Denise Miceli, thank you so much for being on Self Talk. It was just a pleasure to talk about this.
Yes, I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Hi, this is Rachel Astarte from the Self Talk podcast. I'd love for you to send me your emails with questions or stories about yourself. What are you looking for? What are your questions? What are you grappling with in your own personal life that has to do with your identity, with yourself, with your very existence? These are the things that we're going to talk about during the podcast. And go ahead. It's all right. Get deep. I can handle it. So send them to Rachel@selftalkpodcast.com. And I'll see you on the next episode.